Good afternoon, ladies. How are you today?
Good.
Very good.
Good, good. So I'm excited to spend a little bit of time to speak with you today about trauma training for lawyers and how lawyers who are representing victims of sexual abuse or sex trafficking can connect with their clients on a deeper level and be able to better understand them as they represent them. So first we'll get into the introductions, and then we'll go into some questioning and have you both speak to us more in depth on this subject. We have with us today Dr. Stephany Powell. Good afternoon, Stephany.
Good afternoon.
Dr. Powell has spent 30 years with the Los Angeles Police Department. She's now retired from there. She was a vice sergeant and accepted a leadership role at Journey Out in October of 2013. In addition to that tenure with the Los Angeles Police Department, Dr. Powell is also a doctor of education and organizational leadership and utilizes the singular combination in several different ways. She's created and facilitated team building and executive leadership workshops based on positive change dynamics for the fire and the police departments. Additionally, she's also an adjunct professor or assistant professor of behavioral science at Los Angeles Trade Technical College. She's been a speaker and featured on both CNN and Headline News Network, as well as local media in the Los Angeles area. She's published a human trafficking youth prevention workbook, and her workbook has been utilized on a national and international level. Welcome to the program today, Dr. Powell.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Thank you. We also have with us attorney Dani Pinter. She is a senior legal counsel for the National Center of Sexual Exploitation's Law Center. And most recently, she has been a senior attorney for quite some time for the Florida Department of Children and Families and the Children's Legal Services Department. And she brings a wealth of knowledge and experience from her time with the Florida Department of Children and Families over to the National Center on Sexual Exploitation. And I did forget to, so welcome to you today, Dani.
Thank you so much. Glad to be here.
I did forget to mention that Dr. Powell is currently the Director of Law Enforcement Training and Survivor Services at the National Center on Sexual Exploitation. And we are glad to have both of you with us here today. So I want to talk a little bit about understanding trauma and the experiences that some of our clients may have had if we're going to be doing pro bono work for the center. Some of the experiences that our clients had and how that affects how they're going to present and interact with an attorney.
So I think that this is extremely important, because what you're going to find is, especially when you're dealing with victims of human trafficking, they're going to be a different type of client just in the mere fact of their poly-victimization. They have been victimized before that pimp or trafficker has gotten to them in most cases. Research has found that about 80 to 90% of victims of human trafficking were abused sexually and or physically as children. So because of all of that trauma, it has left them vulnerable for, and I use the word, you'll hear me use the word pimp and trafficker. They are one and the same. And so it just makes them vulnerable and at risk and easily manipulated as a result of their trauma. So when you as an attorney are dealing with this type of client, you may find that they may be overly angry or anxious, or they might be completely withdrawn or be annoyed by your questions. And I think the best thing to know that it's not you. That it's really speaking from maybe their lack of trust or them telling their story a million times. Because think about it, especially if you're talking about someone who has been a child of the system. So regardless of whether it's an adult you're dealing with that has been victimized as a child, or you're dealing with a minor that has been victimized as well, you may get some resistance because as you are asking them questions, they are reliving that trauma. And if they have not had counseling, you're going to see it even more so. Even those that have been in counseling, you'll still see it because what will happen is certain questions will trigger them. So sometimes you've got to give them a chance to respond. Let them have pause. Let them be able to take a break. You may not be able to continue that interview all in one setting. You may have to break it up. So you got to be watching them for signals. If they stop talking, or if they seem like they're agitated, or they're squirming around in their seat, you may ask them, would you like to take a break? Would you like to continue this the next day? Let them feel like they have some control over what's going on in this interview. Anything else, Dani, that you think that we should mention in that question?
Yeah, I think some practical advice to build off what you said for attorneys specifically. And that is, because of this trauma that Dr. Powell is describing, you really are going to have to build trust and take the time to establish a rapport with this client. And some practical ways that I've found you can do this is make sure you're really actively listening. And one way you can do that is it might be better to have someone in the room to take notes for you so that you can really be listening and engaged with your client. And if you're a male attorney, it might be a good idea to bring in a female attorney or female support staff because many times these are women, they're not always, but if they are, they've had a lot of bad experiences with men. So it's just a good idea to do that, and it might make them feel more comfortable. Another thing is they're going to be trusting you with their story at some point. If you're going to continue representing them, and they're going to have to explain to you some of the things some of the really traumatic and disturbing events they lived through. It's important that you're warm and empathetic, but it's also important that you don't display judgment. And so one way to not do that is to really be careful. I think it's best, to actively listen and be engaged, but try not to have too much of a reaction, not to have too much of an emotional reaction to what they're saying, because you don't want to make them feel uncomfortable. If they see that they've made you uncomfortable, they're going to feel uncomfortable. And if they feel that you've been shocked by what they said, they're going to feel judged and feel uncomfortable. So it's best to just listen intently, ask good questions. You can express, empathy at the end or at appropriate times with your words about what they've experienced, and that you want to help them, but try not to be overly emotional. I think that's sort of my practical tips from my experience.
So to follow up with that, you spoke a little bit about the clients are going to be in, and they're going to do an extensive amount of talking, or at least we hope so, because that's how we can get the facts out and be able to help them with their case. How is the trauma that they've endured going to affect how they tell their story?
Well, sometimes what will happen is they may not tell, the first time you meet with them, they may not tell you the whole story. They may leave some things out. And it's not because they don't want to tell you the truth. It's because maybe what it is that they're holding back, they may need to hold it back for their own personal protection because they know that it may trigger them. They may be holding it back because they don't want you to judge them or to think that it's their fault. Because think about it this way, they're going to want to please you as the attorney. And so they don't want to tell you anything that they might think might compromise their case. Like if they were to say, yeah, the trafficker was my boyfriend, so I kind of went along with it at first. They may not want to tell you that because then because they think that you might not want to do the case because of that. But what you're listening for is, even if they wanted to do that at first, if she continues to tell her story, what she's going to tell you is that when there were things that she didn't want to do, that's when the abuse, both physical and or emotional abuse, started to play in. So she's not going to want you to judge her. Piggybacking on what Dani was talking about in terms of the shock. So I'll just give you an example. And if you have the ability to have her own support system sit in quietly during the interview, or if you are working with a human trafficking nonprofit and have an advocate sit in, that helps as well. But I will, myself and an attorney from NCOSE was interviewing a young lady, and she talked about being placed in a cage. I already knew about that based on my work that I've done with human trafficking victims, but I knew the attorney heard it for the first time. And she did an outstanding job because she didn't react at all. Whereas somebody else that had never heard that would have reacted to somebody being placed in cages. And so I didn't stop the flow. We just kept talking. And then later on, I think we circled back to it. But the bottom line is there was no reaction and it was just perfect. I also have had clients say, you know, when I told the person my story, they started crying. And I felt bad because I made them feel bad. So a lot of times you will find in the clients that you're working with that they kind of have a caretaker archetype to them. They don't want you to feel bad about what has happened to them. So because of that, you may not hear the story, the full story, till you've talked to them maybe 4 and 5 times. So just know that you're probably going to have to talk to them more than once just to make sure that you have their whole story. So their trauma is going to affect the way that they tell the story. It's going to be minus some pieces. So you just have to be patient and know that. Dani?
That's exactly really all that I would say is that, you know, when we often interview our clients as attorneys, we say, you know, you have to be completely honest with us and tell us everything. And we almost view any lack of detail or maybe dishonesty as a breach of trust. We may almost want to fire that client because of that. And that might be appropriate in some contexts. But in this context, I encourage a different approach to I'll just repeat that you're going to have to build trust and rapport with this client. And before you do that, you're not going to get the full story. And trauma also affects memory. Sometimes that client isn't going to remember certain details depending on the context that you're discussing it. All of a sudden, maybe you'll be talking about the financial aspect, and then she'll remember details related to that because the way that she experienced it is so high emotional that it's going to very much color the details that were important to her, the details that stuck out the most to her. And that's what's going to come out at first. And so when you have follow-up questions, don't be afraid to ask them, and don't be, you know, shocked or disturbed if you're getting new information or different information. That's normal. Go ahead, Stephany, if you want to add anything.
I was just thinking how I'm so glad that you talked about memory, Dani, because I had put that on my list and I forgot about it, but that is so important that, you know, about their memory. It's not that they're lying to you. It's just that they have forgot, because remember with trauma, you put the things in the back of your head that you don't want to revisit. And so sometimes it is because they forgot or they didn't pay attention to the detail. Or sometimes you'll ask them a question and they'll say, I don't know. They may know, but it may be too triggering to tell right now. So I'm so glad you brought that up about memory. And then last, be patient. Sometimes you will ask a question and it'll take them a minute to get to the point because they've told you this whole story. Just sit back for the ride, listen to the story, because there might be some things that you might pick out of that story of information that you really need. So it may take them a minute to get to their point, but that's part of the process as well. Because if the point of my story is at the end, I'm telling you about torture and beating, I need to work my way up to that point to where I feel comfortable to hit you with the point of the answer to your question. So I want to add that as well.
Thank you. So one of the things that we do as attorneys when a client comes in to meet with us for the first time is, while they're talking, what's going on inside of our minds is we're assessing the credibility and the reliability of this person as a potential plaintiff. And is it somebody that we do want to represent or not? What should an attorney understand when assessing the credibility and the reliability of a sex trafficking client?
I think that you can't necessarily make an assessment on that first initial meeting. You know, we talked about sort of the ways that it's going to take a while to get to the heart of that story. And that this person may present as very withdrawn and may not be comfortable at all in that first initial meeting. And that doesn't mean that they don't have anything to say or that they're lying about what they're saying. It's that they're uncomfortable and they're going to have a hard time trusting initially. And, you know, hopefully if you're doing this work, it's because you want to help people. And, you know, if someone comes to you for help in this context of domestic violence or sexual abuse, probe for sex trafficking, probe for that. That may not even be the first thing that they say when they come to you, that they're a sex trafficking victim. And so just having this framework of recognizing someone who's experienced trauma and that there may be more to the story, I think is just the best way to start. And then, you know, take the time to get to know that person before you really make a determination of if you think they're being credible or this is an important case to take.
You know, and a lot of times they may not appear credible. You know, as a police officer, when I would have a victim and I go to the DA for the filing, and the DA would be hesitant to file it because they know oftentimes human trafficking victims don't show up to court. And so, you know, understanding why they're not showing up to court. One, they don't want to face their abuser. And two, they have trauma bonded or they're in love with this person and they don't want to see them get in trouble. See, that might drive their behavior as well. Or if it is a parent that is trafficking them, think about this for a moment. Now, yeah, what my mom did to me was not right, but I don't want to see my mom go to jail for the rest of their life. So thinking of it in those terms might give the impression that they're unreliable. Yeah, they're being unreliable because they're protecting someone else. And so that's where they have to be able to trust you and to be able to have them understand that all of this is also for their best interests as well. So what you may find is that they may be even late or not even show up to your appointment. Now, I know for some people that might be the boundary that makes you not want to represent someone. You just got to reach out to them again. The one that I was just talking to you guys about in terms of the cages, our appointment with her was at 9:30. She told us that she couldn't sleep the night before, that she was up crying at 5:30 because she was so anxious about our initial interview with her. Now, she did show up. But can you imagine someone that's up all night and extremely anxious and fearful? You know, they might freeze. You know, it's part of that response mechanism of fight or flight or freeze. And so they may freeze and they may not show up. It does not mean that they're unreliable or that they don't want to be part of the case. They just need to feel comfortable enough that it's okay to show up, that we're going to take our time with this. You don't have to tell me everything all up front. We can break it up. I'm going to feed off of you in terms of what your comfort level is. That's going to make someone want to be part of an interview than if they feel that they have to have all the right answers for you, that it all has to be done at once, that you may be impatient with them. Once they realize that they're going to be okay through this process, and this process is to benefit them. And they also need to know that there's not going to be any trickery, right? Like if, let's say, just for instance, it's a case where the trafficker may have to be brought in. I'm just using this as an example later on in the case. If you anticipate that happening, you need to tell her up front. And she may say, no, I don't want to do that as a result, but tell her up front. What you don't want to do is have that case start to progress, and then you say, oh, by the way, your trafficker is coming in next week. Also, you got to let them know that at any point, you got to give them an exit, the ability to exit. If at any point you think that this case is not going to work with you, you have the ability to opt out of it. And if nothing else, that kind of softens it for them to know that they're not trapped in. All of these things that I am describing to you are reasons why that victim may not look reliable. And then one last thing, depending on the victim, if you're dealing with a victim that has dealt with the different systems, whether it be the foster system, the criminal justice system, welfare systems, you may look like that person that is representing one of those systems where in the past has failed them. So that may be a barrier for your trust as well, that you may have to break through, because for them, for some of them, the system has always failed them. Now, others may look at the system as being helpful. Like if you've been through a lawsuit before, and you know at the end of the day, that civil system is helpful because you've been through it and it's helped you. Remember, you might be dealing with someone who has dealt with a system that has not helped them. So they're not trusting of the system as well. And remember, you are going to represent the system. So just keeping those things in the back of your head are always helpful as well, to understand why they may be late, why they may not show up, why they may be hesitant when they're talking to you.
And I'll just quickly add, because, we've been talking about this building rapport and earning trust. And in my experience, when you are understanding of those times that they miss a meeting or they're late to a meeting, and you're just really kind and understanding with them, that will go a really long way. Even just being understanding a few times will mean so much to them, that that's what creates that relationship that you need.
How much time do you think an attorney needs to set aside for an initial consultation with a sex trafficking or sexually abused client?
I think you should, I don't think a lot of time, because I think the initial meeting should be an introduction, where you explain to them what you do, what you're capable of doing, that you're here to help them, and you tell them. And I think this goes to our next question, which is about communication. I think it's so important to explain how every step of the process works. Like the first thing that we'll do is, if you're interested in taking a case with me, is you'll sign an engagement agreement. You have plenty of time to look over that agreement. This is what it says and what it does. Then we will have a more in-depth interview. And I think it's so important to explain to the client that this interview might be triggering, that you're going to be asking a lot of questions, why it's important that you do ask those questions. Why are you asking them? Not to be annoying, not to be nosy, not to be judgmental, not because the questions are to decide whether they have value as a client or not, but actually these questions will build the case for them. And explaining that to them and preparing them for that is really important. And every step of the way, reassuring them that if anytime you don't want to do this, please tell me. You can. If anytime I'm doing something that makes you uncomfortable, please tell me. Would you rather us do the interview, break it up into shorter pieces, or would you rather just kind of endure the one long interview and be done, and we'll take breaks and you can change your mind anytime? I think that is what an attorney needs to do to be successful. It's just to be very clear, very transparent. And I don't think you should get into the weeds in that first meeting. That would be a big piece of advice for me.
Okay. So talking a little bit more about the communication concerns, how does that affect how an attorney decides whether to take the case and how to communicate this process to the survivor?
Well, I am excited to talk to all the attorneys with the J. Reuben Clark Society, because you have such a wealth of experience, and sex trafficking survivors need all different attorneys with all different areas of expertise, because their trafficking has touched so many areas of their lives. They will have so many different needs. So that means necessarily not every attorney will be a sex trafficking advocate. Like, it doesn't mean that you may not have experience in this before. You could be a family law attorney, but your expertise could mean so much to this client. So all that to say is, I really encourage attorneys with varying levels of expertise to engage in this if you want to help people and you have a heart for this. But I think you should really spend a lot of time with your family and with yourself, considering whether these cases are something you can handle, because they are very distressing. They could be disturbing. And I think you should make that determination before you go in, because it's important that these women and children and even men have been let down a lot of times. And it's understandable that you might get involved in this case and realize it's really overwhelming for you. But you don't want to do that halfway through. I mean, if you have to, it's better than not being a good advocate for them. But it's better to really assess that beforehand so that you can follow through and be a constant for them, be someone that showed up and followed through. And you have to make sure you do self-care as well. You don't want to do something that ends up being really harmful to you or your family, because this is a heavy weight, although I think it is one of the most rewarding experiences. Stephany, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think everything you said was so perfect. It's so spot on, because a part of trauma-informed care is also taking care of yourself and being aware of the vicarious trauma. And the only thing that I would add, and I think you hit it on the nose, Dani, is when you talk about the different types of attorneys that might be needed. So remember, I talked about the poly-victimization, right? They could have an open criminal case as a result of their trafficking, and they may need help there. Or just recently, a client that we were working with, she had children by her pimp. And so there were some family law concerns as well. And after we finished with our initial interview, she contacted me and said, do you know any attorneys that deal with family law? So again, there's so many types of expertise that is needed just with one, that you might find with just one victim. So I'm glad you brought that up, Dani. That was spot on.
So we don't have very much time left, but I wanted to spend the remainder of our time today talking about the kinds of issues that these clients face and how they're impacted by the legal representation that we can give to them.
Well, I'll just name a few areas, because I don't think people realize the various ways. And then I'll just turn it over to Stephany to talk about how meaningful this representation can be for a client. But one sex trafficking client, and this is a real person, I will just say, had tax issues because the trafficker he reported income in her name, but didn't pay the taxes. He bought a car in her name and didn't pay the bills, so she had debt because of him. He rented an apartment in her name. He stopped paying the rent for that. She got evicted because of that. And so she had credit issues, debt issues, tax issues. And so this is all impeding every aspect of her life, right? Trying to get a job, trying to buy a house, even just trying to get another apartment. And then, oftentimes trafficking victims also have immigration issues, those family law issues, domestic violence issues. And certainly many of them have criminal records that deserve to be expunged and vacated, but it can be a very long process because many times they're brought all around the country and there's charges just in many different states, and it's just an arduous process. So they have many legal needs that can be met by, you may be in your area of practice and not even realize that something that's so easy for you, maybe doing an expungement is very easy for you, or maybe filing, something in a domestic violence, protective order is something you do every day, but that could really change these individuals' lives. Like that is a huge game changer for them, that someone with your level of expertise is willing to help them and do this. This was previously thought by them to be impossible, that they could never, take care of these things when, a little of your time and expertise can just go such a long way.
And can I add just real quickly to that, all those things that Dani just named are also the reasons why you might get the reaction that you might be getting from them, because they have so much that's going on. So for instance, if they have a criminal record, let's say they have a felony, that's going to affect housing. People don't want to house people that have felony convictions. If they're on Section 8, they won't receive housing at all. Or if they have a child who is a convicted felon and they are on Section 8, that child cannot live with them. So there are so many obstacles and things that they are juggling that go alongside as a result of their human trafficking victimizations. And again, these are the reasons why you have to be patient. A lot of times they're going to need counseling. Sometimes you're going to be dealing with a victim that doesn't even have a place to live. And so if you don't have a place to live and you're trying to figure out about eating and things like that, and not have a job, there's so many things that is going on with this person. So yeah, they may seem agitated, they may seem withdrawn. There's going to be so many things and needs that are going to need to be helped with in order for them to feel whole, to go through this process of the justice system. And so that's why it's really important to be able to have resources for them as well. Resources meaning organizations that you can lock into them to be able to help them with things like housing, counseling, employment, childcare, those type of things.
Dani, Dr. Powell, thank you so much for being with us today. I really appreciate you setting aside some of your time to help us learn a little bit more about how to take care of these precious clients.
Happy to be here and talk with you. And I just am thankful for all who are watching this and interested in helping trafficking survivors. It is truly rewarding and life-changing work. And it is the fulfillment of that law is a calling that I feel many of us in this field feel. And you'll actually get the rewards that we often sought after when we initially went to law school. So I just thank you all and appreciate this time.
And I want to thank you as well for being a warrior and being in this fight along with us.
Thank you. We're certainly happy to be in this partnership together. Take care, ladies, and have a good day.
Thank you so very much.